Hey, better late than never in finally getting to this, right? A couple years back, I reviewed the last of the 4 Futurama movies, Into the Wild Green Yonder, and said it was definitely among the show's weakest work. I followed that by saying the movies in general seemed to get worse as they progressed, furthering that claim by saying Bender's big score might be the best Futurama production of all. The Beast with a Billion Backs, however, did turn out to be a disappointment upon watching it over again. So what do I think of the third movie, Bender's Game? Oh boy, have I got things to talk about here! After a title sequence that rips off Yellow Submarine because Beatles, we open with the kids all playing Dungeons and Dragons, and hey, they actually get to use the name here! Which means this movie definitely came out after Lorraine Williams got the boot.
Right now we're fighting for our lives in the lair of the Dragon Queen.
Wrong. Right now you're ass deep in a folding chair.
Making fun of nerds sounds like Bender has a future in sports talk. But the kids turn the tables on him.
Were you built without an imagination?
What? Don't be stupid. Of course not. It just hasn't descended yet.
So Bender doesn't have an imagination, but he is capable of having an existential crisis. Robots in the future are weird. While that's going on, the ship runs out of fuel during their latest mission, but fortunately they get just enough dark matter to get themselves going thanks to Nibbler. Yeah, Nibbler poops dark matter that fuels their spaceship. That's been established before, and it's kind of a plot point here, as it leads to them realizing prices for dark matter are skyrocketing. Then most of the remaining first part is about the crew swiping the ship to run it in some demolition derby because a couple of hicks called out Leela. And the only thing this leads to is Leela being made to wear a shock collar because of her anger issues. I was expecting this to lead to something later on in the movie. This does not happen. Meanwhile, Bender eventually does start playing the game with the kids, and is actually pretty good at it.
Everyone knows red dragons are immune to fireballs as well as all other forms of incendiary attack.
Yes, but I aim not at the dragon, but at the river itself, to create a shroud of steam through which we can escape.
Oh.
And then he goes crazy and starts thinking he's actually in the game, and this ultimately gets him thrown into the loony bin. Yeah, I get that it's because Bender doesn't know how to control this newly found imagination of his, but given that the professor warns of the dangers of D&D, there's definitely an uncomfortable comparison to Mazes and Monsters here. Anyway, as dark matter prices keep rising, which surprises no one because Mom has a monopoly on dark matter, the professor reveals he has a plan to fight this. Eco-terrorism!
This! If ever the two crystals should meet, their wave functions would collapse like Raymond Burr's trampoline, once again rendering all dark matter inert and useless as fuel.
But then we'll have no fuel.
But once we free society from dependence on Mom's dark matter, scientists will finally care enough to develop cleaner alternative fuel.
Okay. Oh boy. Where do I begin? First off, let's talk about how the professor plans to do this. So the only reason dark matter works as a fuel is because it's linked to this metaparticle that the professor created purely by accident, of course. But it also created an anti-backwards crystal that will negate the metaparticle's energy if the crystals come within 6 inches of each other, rendering all dark matter inert again. Because that's how the laws of energy work in the 31st century. It's not really good when the rules of Blern's ball make more sense. Second of all, and let me say this as someone who has long been an advocate for finding alternate fuel sources in our own time, this is a really stupid plan. There is a reason people like myself say we need to find new fuel sources before the current supply runs out. Because if we wait until then, millions of people will die while waiting for a replacement. Now, in this case, dark matter is only being used as rocket fuel, but the professor would still be causing all forms of space travel, which is a pretty big means of commerce in this time, to shut down. He would even be destroying the source of his own business. He even hints that the scientists really won't search for a new fuel source because that's not where the most money can be made. And keep in mind, this plot doesn't even work as an allegory for environmentalism because it's not even stated in this movie or in the series as far as I remember that using dark matter has any negative effects on the environment. Just that Mom's monopoly on the product is driving the price up. The only reason the professor is doing this is just for a personal vendetta, which actually makes selling out to the Wongs in the next movie make even more sense because clearly Farnsworth only cares about himself. See, this is why I respect Bender, because at least he's honest about being a self-serving narcissist, while the professor hides behind this facade of idealism. Anyway, it turns out the kids found out where the professor hid the anti-crystal and turned it into a D12 for their game. And after Mom's boys try to break into Planet Express to steal it, the professor recovers it and orders everyone to head for the dark matter mines, hypocritically burning dark matter in his mission to destroy the stuff. After they sneak into the mine in a way that's not lampooning D&D at all, they make it into the heart where they discover... Okay, this is where the writing does start getting clever and even stupider at the same time. Nibbler, who was kidnapped by Mom's boys earlier, reveals that Mom was the one who mined away all the dark matter that he and his fellow Nibblonians had produced back on his home planet, which caused the planet to collapse. Which was seen all the way back in the show's 4th episode, where Leela found Nibbler. It is a nice shout out to tie that plot element back and reveal what really happened to the other Nibblonians, as Mom had captured them once she discovered where the dark matter came from. However, if this is in fact the only way dark matter is produced and no one had seen or heard of the Nibblonians before, how did the people of Earth even discover dark matter's existence in the first place? Furthermore, now that they know how Mom could hoard the dark matter supply, all they have to do is release all of the Nibblonians, transport as many as possible back to the city, reveal where the dark matter comes from, and then dark matter would become readily available for everyone, especially those who took one in as a pet like Nibbler. Mom's business would be ruined, and people would still have dark matter for fuel. But no, as we'll see, the professor still plans to kill dark matter as a fuel source just because. So they all make it into Mom's Scrooge McDuck office just as Bender is about to get a robotomy in the nut house, and when Farnsworth swallows the crystal, it somehow reacts with all the dark matter Bender had swiped from the litter box and...
Oh, this is crazy. Ow! What the... You okay, Leela?
I think so.
Okay, did Sid and Marty Krofft start writing this episode?
Bender?
I know not of this Bender. I am Titanius Anglesmith. Welcome to Cornwood.
So yeah, they're in a fantasy world. And this is admittedly when the movie becomes actually more than tolerable. I don't know how much of this I want to spoil for you guys, because it really is the best part of the movie. In fact, I'd recommend just watching the last 30 minutes if possible, just because of how insane it is. And yes, it's the good kind of nuts, because while the first 2/3 were centered around a plot objective that made no sense within the world it was set in, the final third moves it into this fantasy world where clearly anything can happen. Suffice it to say, it's a loose parody of Lord of the Rings, where they have to destroy the Die of Power that does magical crazy things when rolled, and is gradually driving Fry insane because it's in his possession. About the only negative thing I can think of here is that it does arguably continue that anti-D&D message by suggesting it can drive you crazy. That, and there's this really bad Robin Williams gag that made me want to rage smash something. I'll just skip ahead to the climax, which turns into Star Wars, right down to Mom's youngest son revealing that Farnsworth is his actual father. Okay, now this story is being written by Richard Garriott circa 1980. Mom eventually gets the die, and this somehow causes everyone to be sent back to their world.
Bender's mighty imagination, amplified by a dark matter resonance, created an alternate reality that very nearly blew our minds.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
Before my moment of shame, can I give my boy a hug? Like father, like son, eh, boy?
We both eated the crystals.
Damn it, I had hoped they'd glossed over that plot detail just like the Leela shock collar. And the movie ends with the professor saying he's found an alternative fuel source, making the Niblonians pull their spaceship home like horses. Because that's more humane than what Mom was doing to them, right? By the way, what ultimately does happen for everyone who needs space travel? They go back to using whale oil, because that's more environmentally friendly. I have so many mixed opinions of this movie. Like Into the Wild Green Yonder, it suffers from the first quarter having little to no connection to the rest of the story, and it also has a ton of plot holes that can really make you cry when you remember just how beautifully Bender's big score was written. Part 4 does get crazy enough to be entertaining, but that still gets set back by the main story's central objective not making sense, along with quite a bit of anti-RPG subtext that makes things more than a little uncomfortable. It's still not as bad as Wild Green Yonder, but after watching all of them over again, the last 3 do feel like they needed to just throw something together without polishing it in order to get all 4 of the movies completed in time. Still, despite the flaws of this and most of what got made post-revival, it's still Futurama, and it's still a lot better than most of what passes for adult animation nowadays. And who knows, maybe someday another channel like Cartoon Network will get this thing revived again. On second thought,